There I was, standing barefoot on the hot pavement, wearing nothing but a towel and holding a bottle of shampoo, watching a tow truck drag away my custom-built matte black truck named Beast. The truck I'd spent 3 years and a small fortune building, piece by piece, in my garage. And there she stood, Karen, hands on hips, phone still in the air like some kind of suburban war trophy, recording the moment like she'd just bagged a lion on a safari. I'd been in the shower for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. That's all it took for her to call the tow company, have them show up, and take my truck. Because apparently, according to her, my truck was violating the visual harmony of the community. Never mind that I parked it in my own driveway. Never mind that I'd lived there for 8 years before her. Never mind that her own rusted minivan leaked oil like a busted faucet. None of that mattered. What mattered was that Karen had declared war. And she had no idea she'd just messed with the wrong veteran. 2 days before the tow truck incident, I'd come home from a late shift at the shop and parked Beast like I always did, backed into the driveway so I could admire that beautiful custom tailgate wrap with an eagle flying through flames. The next morning, I found a bright pink envelope stuck under my wiper blade, sealed with a sticker shaped like a cat paw. I opened it, and inside was a handwritten violation notice in glitter pen. Not typed. Not official. Just a passive-aggressive scroll that said, "Your vehicle is intimidating. Please remove it immediately or face fines." At the bottom, in all caps, it read, HOA Vice President, Karen T. I didn't even know we had a vice president. I didn't even know we had a Karen. And I sure didn't know that HOA fines could be written in sparkly pink ink on stationery with tiny kittens wearing sunglasses. I crumpled the note, tossed it in the trash, and went about my day, figuring it was just a neighbor with too much time and too little chill. I figured wrong. The next morning, there was a second note. This one laminated. Same glitter pen, same kitten paper, but now it came with a printed fine slip for $100 and a warning that if I didn't move my truck, the HOA would be forced to escalate the issue. I walked down to the mailbox, still holding the slip, and that's when I met her for the first time. She was standing there with a tablet in one hand and a Starbucks cup in the other, snapping pictures of my house like she was working for the FBI. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She just nodded toward the truck and said, "That thing is ruining our curb appeal." I told her it wasn't on the curb. She said, "It might as well be." I laughed. She didn't. I tried to explain that Beast was within regulation, even by HOA standards. She cut me off mid-sentence and started listing violations I'd never heard of before. Visual obstruction, exhaust intimidation, paint tone clash. I asked her what law school she went to. She said Pinterest. That should have been the end of it. But when someone like Karen decides they don't like something, they don't stop. They escalate. By Friday morning, she had added 3 more official violations to my mailbox. One for noise pollution even though I hadn't started the truck all week, another for patriotic imagery deemed aggressive, and one more for inappropriate tailgate iconography. That's right. She fined me because my tailgate had a flaming eagle on it. According to her, eagles represented violence and fire was an environmental threat. She told me she preferred hummingbirds and pastels. I told her I preferred freedom and horsepower. That same afternoon, I attended the HOA meeting she advertised by sticking flyers on every mailbox, claiming it was a community gathering to restore neighborhood elegance. I walked in with a GoPro on my chest and a clipboard full of county regulations. Only 6 people showed up. Karen stood at the front like she was about to host a TED Talk, pointing to a poster board labeled Operation Curb Cleanse. My truck was on the board, dead center, circled in red with angry little arrows drawn around it. She said my vehicle was a bad influence on children and attracted the wrong element. My neighbor, Mike, who ran a lawn care business with 3 trucks uglier than mine, nodded along like she was preaching gospel. I spoke up, politely pointing out that Karen's rules weren't backed by any signed community agreement, that the HOA charter hadn't been updated in years, and that she had no authority to hand out fines. Karen glared at me like I'd just insulted her third husband. Then she muttered something about revising the charter last week and being voted in by an emergency digital ballot. I asked her to show the votes. She said they were confidential. When I asked who else ran against her, she said she was the only one brave enough to lead. I asked what made her brave. She said she once called corporate when a McDonald's forgot her extra pickles. I reminded her that we weren't running a burger joint, we were just neighbors. She didn't appreciate the sarcasm. I didn't think she'd go as far as towing Beast. Not when I hadn't technically broken any laws. But that Friday evening, just as I stepped out of the shower to grab the towel, I heard a strange noise outside. A low mechanical hum. I looked through the window and saw flashing yellow lights, and my heart dropped. I ran outside, soaked, and screamed at the driver to stop. Karen was there, of course, phone out, recording everything and acting like she'd just exposed a war criminal. I begged the driver for a minute. He said he was just following orders from the HOA. I asked to see paperwork. He shrugged. Beast was already lifted onto the truck bed. It was too late. As they drove away, Karen turned to me with a tight-lipped smile and said, "Next time, don't bring a monster to a garden party." I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up Googling every county law I could find, researching HOA rights, and flipping through property zoning forums like a madman. That's when I found it. A tiny clause in the county records. One I almost skipped. It stated that the road in front of our cul-de-sac wasn't technically private. It was county-owned, left over from an old land deal decades ago. And it had recently been listed for sale due to unpaid road tax assessments. I couldn't believe my eyes. The road Karen used to find me? It was up for grabs. And the county? They were looking to offload it for next to nothing, as long as the buyer agreed to maintain it. I leaned back in my chair, stunned, as a slow grin spread across my face. If Karen wanted to play dirty, then I'd play smarter. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to own the battlefield. So while she was celebrating her victory with herbal tea and HOA bylaws, I was preparing my counterattack with lawyers, surveys, and a very specific bank transfer. Karen had declared war, but I was about to buy the road under her feet. Literally. The sun hadn't even risen when I was already on my third cup of black coffee, eyes glued to my laptop screen while my fingers hovered over the submit offer button. My heart thumped in a way that reminded me of deployment days, not because there were bullets flying but because what I was about to do was going to change the game forever. I wasn't just trying to win against Karen. I was going to end her HOA reign before she even realized her clipboard had been revoked. The paperwork was clear. The road had been listed for tax sale due to unpaid assessments by a dissolved development company. Since no HOA had ever formally taken over the road, the county had kept it in a forgotten file, open for public purchase if someone was crazy or clever enough to take responsibility for it. And I had both qualities in spades. I clicked submit. A confirmation popped up. Offer accepted. Pending deed processing. That was it. I officially had a receipt in my inbox showing I was the legal buyer of the entire street in front of my house, and all of Karen's house too. It would take about a week to finalize the deed transfer, but once it was done, I would be the registered owner of the road. Not just the space in front of my home. The whole road. Every foot of it. Including the part Karen used to host her ridiculous HOA cookouts. The image of her flipping vegan burgers on a grill sitting on a road she didn't own anymore made me laugh out loud, almost spilling my coffee. By noon, I called in a few favors. My buddy Chris, an ex-military lawyer who now worked real estate law, agreed to review the deed and the purchase terms. He confirmed everything looked legit. No tricks. No conditions. Once the paperwork cleared, I would have full control over access, maintenance, and signage for the entire road. I asked him how far I could go with it. He said as long as I didn't block emergency vehicles or violate any ADA laws, it was mine to do with as I pleased. That included adding signs, gates, or even charging tolls. Toll booths in a neighborhood sounded a bit extreme, but I tucked the idea away just in case Karen needed an extra lesson in humility. I spent the next 2 days preparing in silence. No posts. No warnings. I didn't even mention it to my other neighbors. Let Karen think she'd won. Let her float in her little bubble of HOA supremacy for just a few more days. The longer she believed she'd defeated me, the sweeter it would be when her kingdom came crashing down. On the third day, I got a knock on the door. It was a courier with a large manila envelope. Inside was the official deed, stamped, sealed, and notarized. I held it in my hands like a trophy. Jake Carter, owner of Maple View Circle Road. The deed even came with a survey map that included the measurements of the entire road and a description of my new property. A 30-foot wide asphalt path winding through a dozen homes, most notably past the house of one very specific woman. I didn't waste time. That afternoon I printed 3 large metal signs. White background. Bold black letters. Private road, entry by permission only, owner maintains full access control. I called another buddy who owned a sign installation business and told him I'd pay extra to have them installed before the weekend. He laughed when I explained what they were for and promised to have them up by Friday morning. I spent the rest of the day walking the road with my surveyor map, measuring distances, marking spots in chalk, and whistling the entire time like I was painting a masterpiece. I noticed a few neighbors watching from their windows, but no one came out to ask what I was doing. Not yet. Friday arrived with a storm of passive-aggressive chaos. At exactly 7:30 a.m., a giant flatbed truck arrived carrying the 3 signs, and 2 men in orange vests started drilling holes into the ground at each end of the road. I stood nearby sipping a Coke, arms crossed, just waiting. And right on cue, Karen burst out of her house in her signature bathrobe and slipper combo, holding her phone in one hand and a travel mug in the other. She marched over like a mall cop chasing a teenager. She demanded to know what I was doing. I told her to read the sign. She read it. Twice. Her face turned several shades of disbelief. Then she laughed, like I had just made a very poor joke. She asked if this was some kind of prank. I handed her a copy of the deed. She looked at it, blinked, and turned pale. "This is illegal," she snapped. "You can't just buy a public road." "Actually," I said, "it wasn't public. It was private. And now it's privately mine." She stammered, trying to find a hole in the paperwork. Then she asked who approved the sale. I told her the county treasurer did, and I even had the email thread to prove it. She grabbed her phone and started recording, announcing in her best courtroom voice that this was an abuse of power and an assault on neighborhood unity. I suggested she call her HOA board for help. She stared at me, eyes narrowing, then pulled out her phone and dialed. I heard her whispering frantically to someone named Marcia, then hanging up and muttering about emergency meetings and reclaiming jurisdiction. By that afternoon, my signs were installed. One at the entrance of the road, one at the midpoint, and one right in front of my house, facing hers. I added another smaller sign underneath that one for flavor: "Parking violators will be fined in glitter." She didn't appreciate the joke. Later that day, she sent a mass email to the neighborhood warning everyone that I was attempting to stage a hostile takeover and that the HOA would be pursuing legal action. I responded by sending a neighborhood-wide email with a copy of the deed and a summary of what the HOA legally could and could not do. I kept it simple and professional, but I signed off with a PS that read, "Beast will be home by sundown." And sure enough, Beast rolled in at 6:30 sharp, shining under the golden light like a returning war hero. I parked him not just in my driveway this time, but half on the driveway and half on the road. Just enough to send the message. Karen watched from behind her curtains, and though I couldn't see her face, I could feel the rage radiating through the glass. I waved. The next morning, there were 3 more glittery violation slips in my mailbox. I left them there. By noon, the county sent a legal notice to Karen informing her that any attempts to override private ownership of the road would be considered obstruction and trespassing. I didn't send that notice. Chris did. Pro bono. That night, I threw a little celebration. Just a few neighbors, a grill, some drinks, and Beast parked proudly in the background. Most of the folks were supportive, and some even laughed when they saw the signs. One neighbor admitted she had always hated the HOA but didn't want to speak up. Another said Karen once fined him for having his Christmas lights up too long. I told them the HOA was still free to exist, they just didn't control the road anymore. Karen didn't attend the party. But she did send a drone. It hovered above us for about 5 minutes before someone hit it with a broom. It started with a letter. Not glittery this time. No cats, no pink envelopes, no sarcastic stickers. Just a plain white envelope slid under my door sometime around 7 a.m. Inside was a printed document on fake letterhead that read HOA Legal Department in oversized font, like someone had typed it on Microsoft Word and hoped no one would notice. The letter demanded that I cease all unlawful control of Maple View Circle and remove all signs within 48 hours or face legal action. The signature at the bottom read Attorney Stephen T. Keller, HOA Counsel. I raised an eyebrow. That name sounded familiar. Too familiar. And then it hit me. Steve Keller wasn't just some lawyer Karen had hired. He was her cousin. I'd met him once at a barbecue 2 years ago where he got drunk, tried to freestyle rap, and fell into a kiddie pool. That guy was now her legal counsel. Wonderful. I chuckled, set the letter on the kitchen table, and poured myself a bowl of cereal. A cease and desist letter from a guy who once passed out with a hot dog still in his hand didn't exactly scream intimidation. But I knew Karen. She didn't play fair. She played desperate. And when she felt backed into a corner, she'd throw anything she could, hoping something would stick. I figured it was only a matter of time before she dragged this into an actual courtroom. What I didn't expect was how far she'd go to stage the performance of her lifetime. By Wednesday, I was served official-looking court papers. A lawsuit had been filed claiming that my ownership of the road created emotional distress, unlawful obstruction of community activities, and a hostile residential environment. I wasn't even mad. I was impressed. Karen had turned her tantrum into a full-blown legal drama. I forwarded the documents to Chris, who barely made it past page 3 before bursting into laughter. He told me the case wouldn't last 5 minutes in front of a judge, but if I wanted, he'd take it on just for the entertainment value. I told him to go for it. We scheduled a hearing for the following Monday. The day of the hearing, I dressed in my best gray suit and showed up 20 minutes early. Karen arrived in a sparkling gold pantsuit that looked like it was trying to blind the judge. She had 5 binders stacked in her arms, each labeled in bubble letters. She strutted into the courtroom like she was auditioning for a courtroom reality show. Her cousin Steve followed behind, wearing a suit 2 sizes too big and mismatched socks. He tripped on the courtroom rug and almost dropped his briefcase. I took a seat, folded my hands, and tried not to grin. The judge, a calm middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, entered and immediately asked both parties to present their opening statements. Steve stood up and began reading directly from his notes, stammering over legal jargon and citing HOA rules that didn't apply to privately owned property. He claimed I had seized the road through manipulation of obscure county loopholes and that my signs created psychological harm by publicly humiliating residents. The judge raised an eyebrow but said nothing. When it was our turn, Chris stood, cleared his throat, and presented a copy of the deed, zoning maps, purchase contracts, and emails from the county confirming the sale. He concluded with one simple sentence. The road is mine. Legally. Fully. End of story. Karen couldn't stay quiet. She shot up from her seat, waving one of her glitter binders in the air and demanding to speak. The judge allowed it, and Karen launched into a 10-minute rant about how I had single-handedly destroyed the moral fabric of the community. She claimed I had turned her into a laughingstock, ruined HOA meetings, and poisoned the neighborhood atmosphere with my toxic masculinity and motor oil fumes. She even cried. Or tried to. It looked more like someone faking a yawn during a boring movie. Chris leaned over and whispered to me that this would be over soon. But I wasn't done yet. I asked the judge for permission to present audio evidence. She allowed it. I played a recorded conversation from a week earlier, where Karen admitted during a phone call that she had made up 3 of the violations she sent me, just to see if I'd take the bait. The courtroom went silent. Karen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The judge leaned forward, asked her to confirm whether that was her voice. She didn't answer. Then I handed over a second piece of evidence. A sworn statement from a former HOA treasurer, who had recently resigned after discovering Karen had been using community funds to buy decorations for her personal blog videos. Expenses included fake marble backdrops, miniature fountains, and a custom light ring engraved with her initials. The judge's patience snapped. She called both lawyers to the bench, conferred with them for 3 minutes, then returned to her seat and announced her ruling. She stated that my purchase of the road was valid, that my actions were within legal property rights, and that the HOA had no jurisdiction to challenge them. She further ruled that Karen's lawsuit was frivolous and ordered her to pay for court costs. Karen tried to object, shouting that the system was corrupt and that I had friends in asphalt places. The judge slammed the gavel and warned her not to test the court's patience. Karen stormed out of the courtroom, binders clutched tightly to her chest like they were life vests, and she was sinking. Outside the courthouse, a local news crew had somehow gotten wind of the story. They asked me for a comment. I kept it short. I'm just a guy trying to park his truck in peace. Karen also gave a comment. She called me a menace to modern neighborhoods and claimed the legal system was anti-HOA. The clip went viral online by nightfall. Social media exploded with memes. One showed Karen holding a glitter binder with the caption, "When HOA power gets to your head." Another had my truck with the line, "Park like a boss, own the road like a king." But as funny as it was, I knew Karen wouldn't give up. She had taken a hit, but she still had a few tricks left. That evening, while I was relaxing on my porch, sipping sweet tea and scrolling through the internet buzz, I heard the unmistakable sound of something scraping. I walked outside and saw it, freshly painted yellow lines right down the center of the road. Karen had drawn a divider line to split the road in half, claiming one side belonged to the community and the other to me. She had even added her own signs marked HOA zone and included a list of rules under them, taped with clear plastic sheeting. I stared at the line, then looked over at her house. She was standing at her front window, staring at me through binoculars. I waved again. This time, she didn't respond. The next morning, I brought out a pressure washer and erased her line. I didn't say a word. I just sprayed. Karen came out, yelling that I was vandalizing HOA property. I didn't reply. Just kept spraying. When I was done, I left a single new sign in the middle of the road. It read, "Please enjoy this road responsibly. Property of Jake Carter." That weekend, Karen tried to rally the neighborhood for a protest. Only 3 people showed up. One of them left early for brunch. Another tripped over their own protest sign and limped home. The third took a selfie and posted it with a hashtag about community unity that got exactly 0 likes. The sun was barely up when I saw the first sign of Karen's next move. A stack of white flyers, neatly tucked into every mailbox on the street, printed front and back like a political campaign pamphlet. I picked one up and read through it while sipping my coffee. It was titled "Reclaiming Our Neighborhood, HOA Emergency Protocol." Underneath was a picture of my truck, zoomed in dramatically to make it look like a monster about to eat someone's garden. The flyer claimed that my ownership of the road was a danger to community safety, that I had installed unauthorized surveillance equipment, and that I had verbally harassed residents. It read like a fantasy novel written by someone with a grudge and access to a printer. At the bottom, it invited everyone to an emergency unity gathering on Sunday at noon, right in the middle of the street. On my street. The one I legally owned. I was impressed. Karen hadn't learned her lesson in court, clearly. Instead, she had doubled down, planning what looked like a coup d'etat with hot dogs and folding chairs. I decided not to interfere. I wanted to see just how far she would take it. I even mowed the lawn that morning and waved at a few neighbors as if it were just another weekend. But by noon on Sunday, things had escalated beyond anything I expected. Karen had set up an entire block party, complete with rented tables, a speaker system, a banner that read "Take Back Maple View," and even a man in a patriotic eagle costume handing out balloons. There were lawn games, lemonade stands, and a karaoke machine. It was part barbecue, part protest, and part fever dream. Dozens of neighbors who hadn't even spoken to Karen in months were showing up, most out of confusion, some out of curiosity. She stood at the center of it all like a queen reclaiming her throne, giving interviews to a local blogger and handing out HOA resistance pins to anyone who would wear one. I stayed on my porch, watching it all unfold while Beast sat proudly in the driveway behind me, polished and shining like it knew it had won a war already. But when the music started blasting and a group of kids started using the street as a slip-and-slide, I knew I had to step in. It wasn't about the noise or the party. It was about principle. Karen hadn't asked for permission. She hadn't acknowledged the legal ownership of the space. She was treating my property like a public park, and that wasn't going to fly. I walked down the driveway, calm and collected, and approached the table where Karen was making a speech with a megaphone. The crowd quieted as I reached her. She froze when she saw me, gripping the megaphone like it might help her cast a magic spell. I asked her if she had gotten my permission to host an event on private property. She ignored me and started speaking to the crowd about how tyrants always try to silence the truth. I waited. Let her have her moment. When she was done, I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a laminated copy of the deed, the one the judge had stamped in court, and held it up high for everyone to see. I didn't say a word. I just held it there. People started murmuring. Someone from the crowd asked if what I was holding was real. Another person walked up and read it out loud. Karen tried to shout over him, but her megaphone battery died mid-sentence. I turned around and walked back to my porch without saying anything. A few people stayed at the party, but the energy had shifted. The DJ started playing softer music. The balloon guy left. The kids went home. By 5 o'clock, the party was over, the decorations were being pulled down, and Karen was alone at her folding table, surrounded by melting popsicles and unclaimed protest pins. That night, the real chaos began. Karen went silent for a full day. No flyers, no emails, no front yard pacing. I thought maybe the public humiliation had finally gotten through to her. But then, just after midnight, my security cameras caught something that made my jaw drop. Karen, dressed in all black like she was auditioning for a spy movie, creeping along the sidewalk with a can of spray paint in one hand and a roll of duct tape in the other. She spray painted over one of my private road signs, taped a new sign on top of it that read Community Zone, reclaimed by popular vote, and ran back into her house like a raccoon stealing someone's pizza. The next morning, I documented everything. Took pictures. Saved the video. Then I did something unexpected. I printed out the security footage, blew it up, and attached it to the sign she vandalized with a note underneath. Smile. You're famous now. That day, nearly every neighbor came by to look at it, laughing or shaking their heads. Even the ones who didn't like me agreed Karen had gone too far this time. Later that week, Karen tried a new tactic. She submitted a petition to the city, claiming that I was creating traffic hazards and limiting emergency access. But the city had already reviewed the road situation during the court case and had no issue with my ownership. They sent her a polite but firm response explaining that unless I was blocking fire trucks or building fences across driveways, I was free to manage the road however I saw fit. Karen posted the response on her blog with the caption "Corruption runs deep." That was when the media really picked up the story. A national news site ran a headline that read "Veteran buys road to outsmart HOA Karen, ends in neighborhood civil war." The article included pictures of my truck, my sign, and Karen's glitter binders from court. It went viral within hours. My inbox exploded with messages from strangers cheering me on, people sharing their own HOA horror stories, and even a few offers to interview me on talk shows. I declined most of it, wanting to keep things quiet. But the attention was a tidal wave, and Karen wasn't handling it well. She doubled down again. This time she put up a homemade wooden gate at the end of the street with a sign that read "Residents Only, HOA Access Restored." The gate was crooked, painted in clashing neon colors, and tied together with zip ties. It blocked the entrance just enough to annoy delivery drivers. The next morning, I took it down and left it leaning against her garage with a post-it that said, "Not today, Karen." She called the police. They came, looked at the situation, and left after 5 minutes when I showed them the deed again. One of the officers actually laughed and said he remembered the court case from the news. With every move she made, Karen was unraveling. She had started as a self-declared neighborhood leader, but now she was just the punchline in a viral meme. People used to avoid eye contact with her. Now they actively avoided her house. Her so-called HOA members resigned one by one. Mike, the lawn care guy who once sided with her, stopped showing up to her events. Marsha, her loyal supporter, moved away quietly without saying goodbye. Her influence had collapsed.